You meet someone who is endlessly agreeable. They praise your ideas. They never push back. They tell you what a rare person you are, perceptive, talented, ahead of the others. And it feels good for a while. Then you notice the same speech being given to someone else in the room, word for word, the same rare compliment, the same admiring look, and you realize you were not being seen. You were being managed. Nietzsche was deeply suspicious of people who are too eager to please, too quick to agree, too generous with their praise. But his suspicion was not personal. It was philosophical. He had a name for the psychology underneath these behaviors. On the Genealogy of Morality, published in 1887, Nietzsche described a psychological type he called the person of resentment. This is not ordinary resentment. Resentment is a specific condition, the psychological state of someone who cannot affirm themselves, who has no strong center of their own, and who therefore defines themselves entirely through their reactions to others. The person of resentment cannot say, "I am this." They can only say, "I am not that," or "I am whatever you need me to be." Their apparent warmth is not generosity. It is a strategy for managing people who are stronger or more certain than they are. Nietzsche argued in Beyond Good and Evil that displays of selfless concern, the excessive "for you" and "not for myself" sentiments, deserve scrutiny rather than gratitude. He wrote that there is far too much witchery and sugar in such sentiments not to ask whether they are deceptions. That is not cynicism. It is a diagnostic question. What is this behavior doing for the person performing it? These are the 5 behaviors Nietzsche's analysis identifies as signs of that underlying psychology. The first is chronic agreement. Someone who never contradicts you, never argues, never introduces friction. They are not listening to you. They are monitoring you. Agreement requires a position of your own to give up. A person with no position cannot genuinely agree with anything. The second is flattery that arrives before trust has been earned. Flattery at the wrong moment is a bid for access. It is not about you. In Twilight of the Idols, Nietzsche wrote about the Pia Fraus, the holy lie, the idea that improving others by telling them what they want to hear has been the tool of priests and manipulators throughout history. Praise that costs nothing and arrives immediately is almost always instrumental. The third is the performance of victimhood as a recurring role. Nietzsche was precise about this On the Genealogy of Morality. The person of resentment experiences themselves as perpetually wronged. This is not the same as actually being wronged. It is a position that generates sympathy, deflects accountability, and keeps others in a state of guilt that can be spent. If someone's suffering appears whenever accountability arrives, pay attention to the timing. The fourth is the inability to tolerate your independence. Someone of this psychological type needs you reactive, responding to them, worried about them, grateful to them. When you are self-sufficient and calm, they become destabilized. The behaviors that follow, the sudden crisis, the guilt, the withdrawal, are attempts to restore the dynamic. Nietzsche described the herd instinct in Beyond Good and Evil as a deep intolerance of anyone who does not need the group. Independence reads as a threat to people who have built their identity through dependence. The fifth is the lie that protects their image rather than sparing your feelings. Nietzsche distinguished between lies in Twilight of the Idols. There is dishonesty that comes from cowardice and dishonesty that comes from contempt. The person who lies to keep their image intact is not protecting you from difficult news. They are protecting themselves from the cost of honesty. The subject of the lie is always the liar. Here is what makes Nietzsche's diagnosis difficult. These 5 behaviors are often performed by people who believe themselves to be kind. The person of resentment does not experience themselves as manipulative. They experience themselves as generous, misunderstood, perpetually giving to a world that fails to give back. The self-deception is real, which means confronting these behaviors in someone else requires you to first confront something about your own preferences. Flattery feels better than honest friction. Agreement is more comfortable than challenge. The question Nietzsche puts to you is whether you are selecting for your own comfort and calling it trust. A person who never tells you an uncomfortable truth is not on your side. They are on their own side, using your company to stay there.